Hi, and welcome to the Google Partners Nordics News Bulletin. My name is Nick Kogelman. I'm going to be talking through cross-device conversions with you today. A little bit of background on myself. I've been at Google for about 5.5 years now. In the past 2.5, I've been focused pretty much exclusively on measurement and attribution within the SMB space. So I'm really excited to have this opportunity to walk through cross-device for you guys. It's such a big, growing kind of part of the business and part of online advertising in general. So love the opportunity to talk you through these things. I'll say at the very beginning, if you have questions as we go, you have the partners page. Post any questions you have there, and then either me or a member of the team will be sure to get back to you after this. But want to make sure we can address any of those after we go through this presentation. So let's hop right into it. We're going to cover 3 things today. First, we're going to start with kind of a step back and a discussion of what cross-device conversions are. I get a lot of questions about what these are, what they're not, so I just kind of want to do a brief reset, talk about why they're important and what we actually mean when we say cross-device conversions. Next, we'll talk about how we address cross-device conversions within Google AdWords, and then finally we'll conclude with looking at what that might look like in Google Analytics as well. I'll say we'll spend most of our time within Google AdWords. I think personally that's where the information is most actionable. So we'll spend the bulk of our time there, and then we'll close with a little bit on analytics. So let's hop into this. Why cross-device conversions? I'm sure these are stats that you guys have seen tens of times before, hopefully not hundreds of times yet, but when I talk to clients and agencies, whoever it may be, various partners, really these are the stats that I think really matter and why we want to talk about the consumer purchase journey across different devices and potentially across different channels as well. When you think about your own activities, these stats really kind of come to life. When you think about your daily activities, whether it's planning where you're going to be going throughout the day, whether it's how to get to work, how to get to a new client, how to get to dinner or get home after that, whatever it may be, you're probably doing that across a number of different devices. Same with browsing activities and purchase activities. We see, again, 87% of people are doing research before they even get to a store, and then 82% of them are using their phones while they're actually still at the store. So this device, specifically from a mobile standpoint, has really kind of inserted itself into a number of different touch points along the consumer path to purchase, and that's why we want to really make sure that we're taking due notice of it and attributing it proper value. And so I think the kind of the most important stat for us is kind of an online marketing crew, and for especially anybody within the e-commerce world, 40% of smartphone users who research on their mobile device go on to purchase on a desktop, right? So this is really the reason why we care about cross-device conversion specifically, is because a lot of this value is going to originate on mobile devices, and then it's going to end up on desktops. And so I want to take a quick step back because that is super important, but when we talk about cross-device conversions, it's not exclusively smartphones to desktop. That's kind of an area where I see a lot of confusion. It could be desktop to desktop if you think about your work computer and then your home computer, or if you think about your mobile device to your tablet. It's not just mobile to desktop. It could be any device to another device. And so when we talk about why cross-device conversions are important, obviously it's got a huge impact from the mobile perspective, but also just think about how many more devices you have in your home now than you did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it might be when we first started doing this online marketing thing that we all know and love. Things have really changed, both from the types of websites that we can show on, but also the types of devices that we use to access them. So this to me is very important in terms of how we actually attribute value to that device and the role that it plays in the path to purchase. So when we think about this again, you're probably familiar about thinking about how different channels contribute to value to the consumer path to purchase, right? So the intra-channel within one kind of paid medium. This is where you might be doing optimization for the different aspects within AdWords, for instance, right? So thinking about how a campaign launched on the display network might influence consideration or introduce people to our brand, and then how search, specifically branded search maybe, actually drives those final conversions. And so this is something that we're used to thinking about. Different types of channels play different roles within even an AdWords account. The next one that you're probably familiar with is using something like analytics to look at different channels, looking at cross-channel measurement and attribution. And so we think about social and organic and paid and referral traffic and all those different sources and how they all play different roles. Right? We might have some for discovery, we might have some for consideration, we might have some for the actual end purchase. All of them are very important. And again, this is something that I find people are a little bit more familiar with doing. What I'd like to point out, though, is that without this cross-device element, we're really not doing either one of those first two. Right? So if people are discovering us on mobile in one channel, let's say it's a generic search, and then they switch devices to desktop, we can't remarket to them in the way that we typically have unless you're using an advanced product because the cookie ID is not the same. And so that kind of breaks that type of user engagement that people really like to have for a user if they're on the same device. But also, if people tend to interact with different types of media on different devices, it's really hard to model that out if people are changing devices, right? So if I discover you on social on my phone, but then go to search for you on my desktop computer, you're not attributing and thinking about that cross-device behavior, you're really losing the multi-channel aspect as well. Because you're going to see me as a couple of different users, you're going to see me as this person that converted on desktop after having come in from one particular source. And you're going to miss out the fact that I actually discovered you on a completely different source because it was on a completely different device. And so again, it's nothing that we haven't seen before or nothing that we're not thinking about already, but the device element is really crucial to make sure that we're not missing key insights in the analysis that we're already doing. So again, I think when we talk about this, there's a couple of different options that we can use. We talked about the fact that we're going to be talking about AdWords and we're going to be talking about analytics. From an AdWords standpoint, we really need to make sure that we have conversion tracking in place. That's kind of the first step to all of this, right? We can't do any sorts of analyses, we can't do any kind of digging unless we have basic measurement in place first. And so from our standpoint, again, within AdWords, that's going to be AdWords conversion tracking, and we want to have that analytics insight as well so that we can spot trends or use something like user ID to do deeper analyses. I always like to caveat any conversation we have about attribution in the sense that measurement has to come first, because if the measurement's not right, if the actual data is not right, any of the analyses we do after that are going to be incorrect as well. So we always want to make sure that we start with a good measurement base. So having said that, let's jump into what cross-device actually means. I think we know why it's important now, but let's figure out what it actually means, how we implement it within AdWords, and then we'll shift to analytics a bit later. So within AdWords, what we're really talking about is we have multiple columns. And what I see is that we usually have our conversions columns separate from our cross-device conversions columns because that's the default. And the problem with this is that it really starts to treat cross-device conversions as if it's something different, right? And really what we're saying here in this conversation is that a cross-device conversion is the same as any other conversion. It's a conversion from somebody that uses multiple devices, whereas a standard conversion that you might have is somebody that chooses to use just one device. And so I know cross-device can be a bit of a scary term because it sounds different from what we've done before, but if you really kind of want to compare apples to apples here, the conversions column that we know as is and has always been is really same device conversions. If you want to call it kind of a similar name, that's really what it's been. And the cross-device conversions column are just representative of that new user base that's shifting to having multiple devices in their homes, on their person, and researching on different devices at different times. And so that's why I say cross-device conversions are really the same thing. We still know it represents a sale or a lead or whatever you're tracking. It just happens in a slightly different way. And so what I think the best advertisers have done to attack this kind of narrative and this idea is to actually just include cross-device conversions in the conversions column. And the reason why is that, again, you stop treating it as though it's something completely different, and you start treating it for what it is, which is just another way that somebody might actually convert. And so by doing that, there's a lot of benefits. One less column to have to worry about. Right? I mean, if you were to add up all the conversions columns and all the attribution columns that you could add in an AdWords account, you'd have well over 40, I think it is at last count. So, when we talk about doing optimizations and we say, oh, well, how did that go? We always have to start with what are we measuring success on? Which of the 40 columns do we care about with this certain campaign? So consolidating that into one place, huge benefit, makes a world of difference. The other one here is that it's used for automated bidding as well. So anything that's in the conversions column is what we'll end up using for things like target CPA bidding, eCPC, target ROAS, whatever it might be. And so by including this, we not only get to forget about a column because we know it's represented in the same place, but we also know that we're optimizing for it more effectively. And so I see people, a little bit hesitant to add this in because they may have been happening in the past without them automating or optimizing for it. But the thing is, if you start to optimize for it, if you start to value it for what it is, you can start to get more of those interactions as well. And so yes, in the short term, things like CPA or conversion volume will automatically look better because we're including more data. But if we're now optimizing for it, the account performance overall will start to take off. So again, this is only going to become more important because I'm sure you can attest within your own life, the number of devices that you have is not shrinking. If anything, it's only going to grow, or you're going to stay stagnant around those 2-3 devices that you use. And so if we continue to ignore this cross-device behavior, it's going to become a bigger proportion of our sales, and we're actually going to start losing out on sales eventually. So that's why I view it important to attack it now. And again, we're really just trying to value it as what it is, and it's just another type of conversion. So the next kind of big question I get about this is, okay, cross-device conversions, how do we actually measure them? How do I know that they're actually happening? What's the system? I'll tell you before I go into this, you can actually go onto the external AdWords Google Help Center, and you can look up, we have a guide there, we have a white paper on our methodology for actually how we calculate cross-device conversions. If you have not read it, I would advise you to take a look at it. I'll hit kind of the main points here on this slide, but if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive, feel free to pull that up. So the first step here is obviously we observe cross-device behavior. Anybody who's done any digging into how different companies measure cross-device knows that there's a number of different ways that you could do this. We go with an observation method based off of the number of users that we have signed in across the number of different Google properties. We have a large base that we can start with where we actually know somebody's been logged in on their logged into Google on their mobile devices, their tablet, their desktop, whatever it might be, and we can actually directly observe that somebody started on mobile and moved over to desktop. So that's where we start, and that's kind of where the whole process begins. From that large base, we then move to the extrapolation phase, right? So not everybody's going to be logged in across all their devices to a Google property. We know that there's no company that has people logged in all the time across all devices. So what we have to end up doing then is then extrapolating based on a very complex algorithm I'm very confident in that allows us to determine, based on the signals and the types of users that convert cross-device and the signals that we can observe, these users that are not signed in, this kind of proportion of our converter base is likely to have done that cross-device activity. And then the final step is, of course, actually surfacing that data. And that only happens when we're highly confident that the number that we're showing is accurate. So you've probably heard this before. Again, it's available in our Help Center. We operate with a 95% confidence interval. And part of what I think people get confused by is that they believe it's 95% confident that we know that this happened. What it actually is we're 95% confident that the number of cross-device conversions reported is within 10% of the number that we show. So just to kind of put some numbers around that, if we show you 10 cross-device conversions in your account, we're 95% confident that it's within 9 and 11 cross-device conversions. So I see people kind of taking this as a 95% confident that it's 0 or 10. No, it's actually 95% confident that we're between 9 and 11. And so again, this is really highly confident data that we have. We wouldn't surface it if it wouldn't. I know plenty of our engineers and how kind of stringent they are with the data that they choose to show. This is definitely reliable data that we should be actioning. So I want to show you real quick just how easy it is to get those cross-device conversions into the conversions column. So just to make your lives a lot easier. It'll also be represented in these slides, so you'll have it in the recording as well if you'd like that. But it's real quick, so I'll show you. It's only going to take a minute or two, and then we'll hop back into the slides here. So where do we actually go? I'm going to show you in my personal kind of Sandbox account here, so we're not going to have a lot of data, but when you actually go into the tools reporting for any client that you have, you'll see tools and then conversions. And so conversions will take you to this page here where you can see all the different conversion types that somebody may have created over the months or years. So what we're really concerned about is the settings option to the upper left. And this controls the settings for, these two settings apply to all conversions in our account. All right, so we have our conversion bid metric, which we'd really like to see set to conversions. I'll talk more about that in a second. But then we have this option that says include cross-device conversions. And right now you can see this account is not including them in the conversions column. And so all we have to do is check this off and save. And so now anything that's reported in the cross-device conversions column will also be included in the conversions column. And so again, we're just consolidating that information. You can delete a column from your report if you want to, so that you can just show the overall conversion volume, and it just makes life a lot easier. Now I mentioned that sometimes this will be set to converted clicks. That's kind of a leftover setting, I suppose that you could say, from a long time ago in AdWords when we had 1 per click conversions and many per click conversions. What we'd really like to see is this set to conversions. And the reason I say that is because when you set that to conversions, it takes into account all of the explicit decisions you've made about the conversion types that you've set up. Okay, so it's actually something that I would recommend reviewing these settings if you are changing from converted clicks to conversions. It's an important step. It's definitely worth doing, but it does mean that you need to take into consideration what these actual settings are set to. So, for instance, if I have a purchase or a sale here, which is my top conversion type, I want to make sure that I have every type of setting here actually set to something that I've explicitly chosen. The defaults are to count a 30-day look-back window and to include it in the conversions column. And so it becomes really important if we're now going to be optimizing using target CPA off of the conversions column rather than converted clicks. I want to make sure that what we're optimizing for in the conversions column is what's most important to me or my client. And so I just encourage you to take a look through this and make sure that everything is set correctly to what your client wants to optimize for. Something that I frequently see, for instance, is if you are tracking a form submission, you may want to only count when conversions happen once. So my kind of example of this is if somebody were to come into my store and say I'm interested in a bulk order, if they left me their business card, it doesn't matter if they leave me 1 of their business cards or 5 of their business cards. I can only contact them once. The number doesn't change. There's not multiple leads there. It's just 1 lead. And so if that's the case and somebody's tracking lead submissions, I like to track just 1 instance of that per user, because I know even if they end up submitting multiple forms, there's not going to be incremental value from that. Now, if you compare that to sales, I may want to count every time that a sale happens, right? Because if I'm 1 person and I come into a shop 1 time but purchase multiple items, for instance, or if I come in 3 times in the same day and purchase each time, there's incremental value there. And so I may want to count every instance of that happening. That's just 1 example, but again, I would encourage you to treat this as an opportunity to speak with your clients about what these settings have been set to in the past, and just make sure that it's representative of what their current strategy is. Okay, so pretty easy. Again, all we need to do is go into the settings option, make sure that we're optimizing for conversions, make sure that we're including the conversions column, and then right away we've got cross-device included in our conversions column. We only have to look at that 1 column. It's included in our CPA, it's included in our conversion rates, and it's included in our optimization strategies. So again, very easy, pretty quick, but I would encourage you to definitely make that change. So let me just hop back into our presentation here. And again, just so that you have it in the slide format as well, this is the setting that we're hoping to manipulate. We want to change this over to actually including the conversions column. So just as a quick recap here about cross-device conversion tracking within AdWords, here are the benefits to me, as well as some of the conditions, I think, to make sure that this is going to operate correctly. 1, this really helps us be more present on mobile. right? So if we're only looking at same device conversions and last click same device conversions, especially, desktop is going to look particularly fantastic. And it doesn't mean that desktop's not great. It just means that that's where a lot of people go to actually complete the sale. But if we know that people start on mobile to do that research process and then switch devices, we want to make sure that mobile is represented accordingly in the value that it drives. And so if we're not looking at that data, if we're not taking into account, what I more times than not see is people under-investing in the mobile space, and then it actually starts to hinder them on the desktop space as well, right? Because if we're investing in mobile, we're present in that research period, but then we turn it off, you start to see the impact on the last click device being desktop as well. And so that presence on mobile is really important. Obviously, we talked about the fact that measurement comes first before we do any kind of attribution. And so we want to make sure that we have that AdWords conversion tracking code on all relevant conversion pages. I want to call out here, it specifically says AdWords conversion tracking code. So cross-device conversions at this point are only going to be surfaced in AdWords if we're using native AdWords conversion tracking code. That means if somebody's importing goals from analytics, it's not going to show up with cross-device conversions. It doesn't mean it's not happening, it's just a limitation of the platform at this point in time. So if cross-device conversions are really important, something that we want to be factoring in, I actually recommend that clients do implement AdWords conversion tracking code if they're not using it, just so that we can get that cross-device conversion element in the AdWords account. So an important caveat, but obviously in addition to that, make sure that we have it on the right pages. The other aspect of this is if we have somebody using a My Client Center that has the same client managed across multiple child AdWords accounts, you may want to consider cross-account conversion tracking, which is set up at the My Client Center level to make sure that we're seeing the interaction between accounts and we're not duplicating conversions. Okay, just important to point out there. The next one is a lot of people will end up doing something called conditional firing of their code, of their tags on their conversion pages. That can actually limit our ability to show cross-device conversions. So we just ask that you don't do any kind of manipulation to the code to make it conditionally fire, because it'll limit our ability to show you the cross-device conversion element for AdWords conversion tracking. The next one is similar to what we just talked about in terms of how we count conversions. Make sure that we're choosing the right conversion look-back window. And so a good gut check for this is if you look at analytics or if you look at the AdWords conversion reporting, you'll see reports that indicate the amount of time that it takes for somebody to actually convert. Many times clients are surprised how long the purchase process takes. It could take multiple days, especially if you're in something like B2B or a retailer, anything that's not a really immediate need that there is a consideration process for. You may want to consider extending your conversion look-back window. And so the default is 30 days. I actually find, again, for clients in the B2B space or in the e-commerce retail space, something closer to 90 days is actually more representative of how long it takes somebody to make a purchase decision. So worth thinking about the conversion look-back window in addition to the conversion counting options when you're doing that kind of conversion tracking audit. The last one here is obviously by doing this, we just accommodate cross-device behavior. We're going to see more reporting of it. I would also encourage you to think about it with your clients in terms of how they can better facilitate a cross-device experience. So we have a ton of information on the top 25 mobile site principles. A lot of those principles have to do with facilitating behavior across devices. So whether that's saving a shopping cart, emailing a wish list, whatever it might be, to make sure that we are respecting the fact that people might want to change devices to convert. We'll see more cross-device conversions if people are better able to convert across devices. So just something worth pointing out. So I want to wrap up here with cross-device tracking within Google Analytics. And this is something where I mentioned and we spent the bulk of our time on Google AdWords cross-device tracking because I think that's where it's really simplest to see cross-device insights and also action them at the same time. So I'll give that caveat before we dive into analytics. The issue with Google Analytics is that we need to be able to implement something called User ID. User ID is a phenomenal feature. It allows us to essentially pair activity for signed-in users across different devices. But whereas in AdWords we're talking about users that are signed into a Google property, users of user ID have to actually be signed in to the end client's website, right? So these are not Google signed in users. These are people that actually sign into the physical website that analytics code is on. And so if you have run into this issue where there's a lot of clients, a lot of businesses that don't have a large signed in user base on their website across all their devices, and that limits our ability to use the user ID feature. And so it's a long-standing product ask to find a solution that doesn't need that. I can tell you we're definitely working on it, but right now the option within Google Analytics is to use user ID. And so again, phenomenal feature if we have a signed in user base, but it's not going to be as helpful for clients that do not have that. So just to kind of give you a hint of what we're doing here, you need to be using Universal Analytics Code, which most users have enabled at this point. And then it actually does take some customization. So again, when somebody signs into a website, we want to do all this anonymously. We don't want to capture an email address or a username or something like that. We basically just want to be able to pair, my activity as Nick, whether I'm using mobile, tablet, or my laptop. I want to make sure that it gets assigned to my user ID and that it doesn't show up as 3 different users. So the way to do that is to assign me a user ID regardless of which device I'm using when I sign into the actual website itself. Another recommendation that we have is to actually create this as a separate reporting view. That way you'll have a kind of your overall reporting view, which we always recommend that you maintain kind of an unfiltered data source that has always got everything in it. And then you'd have a secondary source that will also have just your signed in user base, right? So just users that have captured the user ID bit, we can actually see for people that log into your website, how do they act separately from people that may not be logging in. And this gives us a really kind of good overview of how people are acting that are frequent users of the website, because those are going to be people that most likely sign in, versus people that may be new or unsure or at least haven't actually created an account. One thing I like to point out, similar to how you'll see more cross-device conversions if it's easier for people to convert cross-device, you'll see more people log into the website if they have a reason to log into the website. So if you think about exclusive member deals, if you think about some of that cross-device activity, even of saving a shopping cart, free shipping options, whatever it might be, some sort of incentive or a reason for them to sign into the account is going to help us boost these numbers as well. And at the end of the day, why do we actually do this? It's for this type of detailed reporting. These are some of the best reports that you'll see on cross-device conversions, again, because it's directly observed from people that have signed into the website. And you'll see these device overlap reports. Essentially show you like what percentage of your user base are using multiple devices, how many devices are they using, and what role do those devices usually play in their path to purchase. So we can see things like for 30% of our revenue, people started on tablet. Even if they didn't actually end up converting there, their kind of sequence of sessions started on tablet and ultimately resulted in a sale, but again, it might not have been on tablet itself. And so we get a really good insight into all the different roles that these devices play, and you can better attribute value because you see a much cleaner picture. So that was kind of our whirlwind overview of cross-device conversions across AdWords and analytics. I would say if you have one takeaway here, the easiest kind of next step is to make sure that your clients are using AdWords cross-device conversion tracking from an AdWords standpoint. I think the actionability there is unbeatable. The fact that you can just include it in any automated bidding solutions you're already using within AdWords, the fact that you can get rid of a column and just start focusing on conversions regardless if they happen same device or cross-device is just a phenomenal reason to actually get that activated, make your lives a little bit easier, but also start valuing all those different devices and the different roles that they play correctly. So I will leave you with that. Again, if you have any questions, please do post them on the partners page and we'll make sure to get to them. But otherwise, I wish you a great rest of your day and a good rest of your week. Thanks very much.